I'm a writer, and this is an educational YouTube series intended to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversations with other writers.
Katy Boyer has a PhD in English and Visual Studies from Pennsylvania State University. She writes about the intersections between second-generation British Romantic poetry and Romantic ballet, with special attention to the Romantic dancer's body and its many powerful effects. She currently works as an assistant professor of English at Randolph College in Lynchburg, Virginia. And this is my conversation with Katy. Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. So, what are you working on now, and what motivated the project or projects?
I have got my proverbial irons in a couple of different fires at the moment. So I just finished writing my dissertation a couple of months ago and defending and all that good stuff. And now I am trying to mine it for articles with, a vicious disregard for its overall structure. And then, you know, in the future, theoretically, I would love to try and publish it as a monograph or a book length work. Though that feels like it's a ways away. But also in the sort of creative world, I am working on both a novel and a bevy of short stories.
So, what's the dissertation about?
So my dissertation is called Fair Creature of an Hour, and it is about sort of the act of spectatorship in 19th century British poetry, but also 19th century ballet. And it kind of poses the question, what does it mean to look on a body as it's in the midst of destruction? So my dissertation reads the works of the second generation British romantics like Keats, Byron, Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, against these romantic ballets. So things like La Sylphide, Giselle, even to as late down the line as like La Bayadere. But it's invested in thinking about, the way we encounter bodies both in space, but like through the veil of text as well, and how I guess what it says about us as readers and spectators when we take pleasure from the destruction of the body on the stage and on the page.
And the novel, what's that about?
Oh, yes. So the novel, I think, is very much thematically intertwined with a lot of my scholarship, but it is about a young woman who encounters a mysterious figure, shall we say, in her very repressive medieval society. And she finds in this figure, who she learns later is a demon, she finds the possibility for happiness outside of her very structured and very restrictive day-to-day life. She becomes interested in, the possibilities for her happiness kind of through some unusual means, like unpleasantly, self-harm, destruction, and despair, and how all those things, if they don't bring happiness per se, they can bring a sort of feeling of escape or enlightenment or something. So oh my gosh, I started it at the beginning of graduate school, and it's hanging over me like a sword of Damocles, but it's very much wrestling with a lot of the same questions about the intermingling of desire, violence, destruction, despair, and elation.
And the short stories that you're working on, do they build out of that larger novel or ideas from that novel?
Certainly ideas from the novel, they are not like set, I'm not building a cinematic universe here, but I think the questions that haunt me and the questions that fixate me are kind of perpetually churning in my mind. So I'm always interested in the body and how we encounter it, and what we what we make of suffering, just as flawed human beings.
Wonderful. I can't wait to read all the things.
I hope I finish them someday. I hope you can read them.
So, what have you learned about yourself through scholarly writing and the research process?
Oh, That's a good question, because I feel instinctively that you are, hoping for some kernel of wisdom here. And I think what I've learned is nothing good. I mean, I'm being a little bit silly, but it's really been kind of enlightening to take on the daunting task of graduate study, but also the writing of a dissertation. I have learned that much as I might try to distance myself from my subject matter and to write with that sort of professional detachment that's so sort of lauded in the scholarly community, I'm not very good at it. I can't seem to get away from my subject matter. And I think personally, I can't speak for anyone but myself, but the academic is truly inextricable from the personal. I think every time I pick up the pen to write, or, well, really, every time I type something into my little Microsoft Word page, I'm directly pulling from, a reservoir of memory, of emotion, personal reference points. And I think the valuable thing that I learned from, performing all the tasks necessary for a graduate student is just to embrace that and not to fight it to whatever extent is possible. But, if I can't avoid it, perhaps then rise to meet it instead. And while I'm not so much interested in like leveraging my identity in some bizarre form of identity politics or something, I just want to be a little bit more open about my own engagement with my research. The other thing that I've learned that is also maybe of dubious use to people studying writing is that it's very important to me that my writing be beautiful, or at least as beautiful as I am able to make it. I make no claims to my talent, but nothing bores or frustrates me more than my own prose when it's like brackish, carbuncular, dysfunctional, boring, etc. I hate it. I have a vested interest in, the production of my prose just as much as the production of my ideas.
Wonderful. I think those are both really great points. If you're not interested in reading it, how can you expect your audience to be interested in reading it?
Exactly. And I mean, I'm probably just revealing my narcissism in this moment, but I mean, it's the only way I can get through. I have to write to a standard that I find pleasing, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that connection with the subject matter and your own writing is super important because that's a way we create our own sort of thumbprint in scholarship and creative writing is to make that bridge across these two areas. And that kind of creates a personality on the page.
At the very least, I think I'm internally consistent. For someone who can never seem to escape my personal connection to my materials or even my sense of alienation from my research, of course I would have to write in a way that I find engaging or pleasing. I mean, again, probably just a sign of my my bad attitude, but at the same time I've embraced it at this point.
So, what's the role or responsibility of scholarship or scholarly writing for you? What keeps you generating material? Why do scholarship? Why write?
I think there are a couple of different questions in the mix here. There's of course the question of why I write and why I feel that it's important to produce scholarship, and I'm happy to talk about that. And then there's the other question of like the role or responsibility of scholarship and scholarly writing. And I think there have probably been a great number of people who have already spoken very elegantly about our moral responsibilities as scholars, or if we are going to make a stab at being a member of academia, the kinds of ways that we can give back to our communities through our research. I think that's all very interesting and very important, but again, I wouldn't be the first to say it, and I know that there are folks who have said it much better. So I think I'll focus on the other half of that question, which is, why do I write and what keeps me coming back to the page? Because again, narcissist, right? But for me, when I was a young person, I had things that I wanted to say. I had a sense of my own inner world, and I thought, or I hoped, that it was a rich inner world, and I was interested in, my own sort of cognition. I don't mean like to the exclusion of other people's cognition and their own sense of the world, but I was interested in getting to know myself and learning how to express my ideas, again, in a way that I found pleasing or entertaining or elegant. And I was so frustrated constantly by the things that I wanted to say or the ideas that I wanted to express, and just my absolute lack of ability. The sort of disjunction between and I'm not saying the beauty of my ideas, but like the beauty of ideas, right? Art that I would see, or media that I would interact with, or my deeply held convictions, or my most sacred bonds of friendship and kinship, things that matter to me as a person and that I wanted to write about, or to join in some kind of conversation about. So it took a really long time to learn to articulate those things that were so precious to me. And I don't know, I think once I started learning, once I began to learn to write, but also when I began to learn to research and to formulate ideas in a way that was cogent and articulate, it's hard to stop. I don't know. I think I probably fall into like the sort of romantic with a capital R idea of like, oh, well, writing, it's a form of self-expression and connecting to the world around you. And it all sounds very trite to say out loud. But, despite all that, I think research and writing is such a magnificent way to discover yourself, but also to like learn your place in the world, and to suddenly envision yourself as part of a larger whole and as part of a community as well. So, all all jokes of my horrible expanding by the minute ego aside, I think it's one of the best ways, or it's one of the best ways I know, into a more introspective and thoughtful life.
How have your experiences studying abroad in London benefited your scholarly research and writing? Why should scholars and writers study abroad?
I think that's, absolutely related to my prior answer. All the stuff that people say about, travel, it broadens your horizons, it makes you, a more empathetic person. Like, of course, that's all true. It's all true, and you should do it. But, for a more sort of personalized answer, it can be, again, so enormously beneficial to a person, especially a young person, to see how you function as a minute part of a larger whole, to suddenly feel alienated in a good way from everything that's familiar to you, and to be submerged in a completely new paradigm or a new context. Visiting sites of historical and cultural importance in the best of circumstances help a person to learn to feel more deeply and more keenly the joys and sorrows of just being alive in the world. Like cry when you look at a great painting, or when you go to a shrine or a battlefield, nurture a sense of reverence, rejoice in art and expressions of human kindness, feel more deeply what it means to exist within a broader history.
And I completely agree. Embracing that different, experiencing that different, it's all very new. It's sort of like you're a fawn learning to walk with brand new legs. And one of the things that I found most fascinating was you can feel the underground in London. So you can just be sitting at a restaurant and eating or doing whatever, and the earth kind of moves under you. And it reminds me of the Telltale Heart.
Yeah, but I mean that's a brand new way to encounter something that was once familiar to you, oh, now, you can feel in your body, or like through your limbic system, you can imagine the sensation of that telltale heart beating beneath the floorboards because you've had this very particular experience. Some famous writer once said, our principal task is to make the strange familiar and make the familiar strange, and I think that obviously applies to any kind of writing or any kind of artistic projection. Anything that we can do to sort of shake off the cobwebs in our own brains and in our limbic systems is so enormously helpful.
What London experiences do you think have benefited you most in your writing? How and why?
Okay, I have a pretty specific answer. It's related to my dissertation, but because my dissertation is partly about romantic ballet and ballet in performance, I mean, I have to say, like, the most beneficial thing that I've done is going to see live ballet performances. We were just talking about what it means to experience something physically and to make new memories in new places and to kind of expand your own perceptions of like what it feels like to encounter a work of art, right? That's so true for ballet. I mean, you can watch a performance all day long and it can be, like on a DVD, or you can stream, a performance of Giselle by the Danish Ballet or something, for example. And that could be a glorious experience. You can feel moved and you can enjoy the staging and you can enjoy following the action of the ballet right from the comfort of your own living room. But there's something so incomparable about sitting there in the stalls or, in the pit behind the orchestra or something and seeing the aura of that performance really take shape in front of you. I mean, it is truly like an atmosphere descending over you. I never expected to do something like cry during a performance, but it can be so incredibly touching just to see these incredibly skilled performers entering into a space of physical extremity on your behalf, for your pleasure. And of course, for the development of their own artistry. But it's just, there's nothing like it. I mean, any kind of live performance is going to have such a special atmosphere to it. Obviously, on this trip together, we've watched a couple of plays already. We went to see Richard III at the Globe. Amazing. We went to see Witness for the Prosecution as well. Again, amazing. The recording would not capture that sort of electric atmosphere. So I find myself so touched and lucky and fortunate to see dancers in person and actors as well, and just bear witness to their mighty talent.
So, when you're struggling in research or writing for whatever reason, what strategy or strategies do you use to get yourself back to the page?
So I was thinking about this in preparation for this interview, and I came up with an answer, but I still don't know if it's really just an avoidance strategy that is masquerading as a technique for getting back to the page. But, it's what I've done. I won't say it's what worked for me, but it is what I have done. But for me, when the words run dry, they don't just come back, they don't spring anew. They don't do like some weird cellular mitosis and just appear. So I have to take in something else that someone else has done, whether that is watching a movie, reading manga, playing Dungeons and Dragons with my family and friends, and like generating story on the spot, or at least words of some kind. That might also mean, going back to one of my principal texts that I'm studying for an article and rereading it and seeing if I can dig up any new inspiration. But I have to, I'm like, what is it, like a bilge pump or something that has to like take in the bilge water and then pump something out? I have to take in someone else's words, or at least images, or something kind of fruitful and evocative before I can even hope to produce something else. I just when the bilge pump is empty, it's empty.
That's a strategy that I use as well. If I'm struggling to write or get something out, I go to somebody else's work, and I love how that influence, if you just sit there for a minute and let it influence you, how that can help stimulate other processes.
What's that? There's an adage that's like good in, good out, or bad in, bad out. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where it's like, oh, you take in, works of like high artistry, like great pieces of literature, fine artworks, stuff like that, and you'll produce stuff that's good as well. I don't know that I believe that, at least personally, again, can't speak for anyone but myself. But for me, it's often like trash in, something out. It doesn't matter what I'm taking in as long as it's interesting and I'm having a good time doing it.
Right. And if it's crap the first time around, that's what revision is for. Revision is where the magic happens.
That's right. That's right. An essential part of any writer's process.
So, what is your favorite part of the writing or the research process and why?
Funny you should say that. It is actually the revision process. So I think it's kind of thick, right? But like I love that moment in the revision process where the draft is, it's lying on the slab, it's stone dead, and it is your job, your heinous, unlikely task to bring it back to life again somehow. And I think there usually comes a moment, it's like right after you've reached peak disgust with yourself and your ideas, and you're like, this is without value, and I should be jailed for trying to write it, and suggest that anyone read it. But after that moment, if you can dismiss the ego a little bit, and you sort of find your little mouse hole back into the text or back into your ideas, things start to light up a little bit. You lose yourself in the revision process, and it's kind of a bloodbath sometimes, right? I mean, to extend our corpsely metaphor. But once that revision process is really rolling and it's moving and moving and moving, it feels so good to dissect a little bit and to make a new shape for something. There's such a joy to that process.
So, what revision strategy or strategies do you find most useful when revising your own work? What problems or challenges do these activities help you solve?
So, okay, I am the child of a journalist and a computer programmer. So, when I was growing up, there was a lot of emphasis on efficient communication, but also like syntactical correctness, grammatical correctness, and sort of appreciation of and respect for mechanics. And I think that made me crazy. And in a way that has been productive for me over the years, in a way that I am deeply thankful for to both of my parents. So again, 1,000 asterisks next to any answer that I'm going to give here, but I'm so doggedly fixated on the pursuit of the beautiful in writing, or the pursuit of the compelling, I suppose. I love prose that can find the right balance between being a little mysterious or a little even labyrinthian, a little bit, ornate, that is a little bit indulgent in language, but at the same time is clear in its ideas, that is structurally sound, and that is, paced and organized in a way that's exciting to read. And when it comes to having such a focus on style, you could quite reasonably call this a flaw. I would call this a flaw in myself. And this is not just, it's not like one of those like, it's a flaw, but I'm so lucky to have it. Like it really has been detrimental to my writing process at times, but I have also found it to be essential as a part of my individual process, because that, like the pursuit of making something beautiful or compelling or pleasurable for me to read, that's how I find my way into a piece, and that is how I start to understand my ideas and make maximal use of them. And I guess, if I really wanted to get into it, when I say beautiful or pleasurable or compelling, I'm not just talking about like some idea of rhetorical elegance or pleasing style in general, though of course that's part of it. Really, I mean, the pursuit of a kind of lyrical voice that prompts the imagination to linger with specific images or turns of phrase. This also probably has to do with my background in creative writing, but also art history, where image and sense are so inextricably bound to any scholarly writing. My revision process for that reason usually boils down into a prolonged search, a maddening search for the most evocative language I can find. However, once that has kind of taken place, there is definitely a secondary revision for clarity and flow that are all bent towards the same ends.
What reading suggestions do you have? What scholars and or writers do you keep in your back pocket?
Oh gosh. So I was thinking about this as well. And I was like, okay, just do just do a few, just a couple. And of course, like I disobeyed instantly this little dictum for myself. But in terms of scholars, the academics or the academic writers I keep returning to are Saidiya Hartman, Catherine Belsey, who wrote a really interesting text on just like textual analysis, close reading, and visual analysis that I think about all the time. Also, Elizabeth Bronfen, whose work on the body and the gaze and like spectatorship to death and destruction is just fascinating to read. Also, my little dirty secret, my little scholarly point of shame, a writer I can't seem to get away from, despite his genuinely troubling past and legacy, is Paul de Man, the French deconstructionist. As contemptible as his association with like the Nazi party in, I believe, Belgium is, and was, and will continue to be, some of his ideas about the way text exceeds itself and the way we, again, encounter text and the madness of reading, I'm continually enthralled. So, that's my own peccadillo to sort out with once I reach the pearly gates. But, obsession is obsession, I guess. In terms of fiction, I am absolutely stunned, astonished, besotted with, enchanted by the works of Patricia McKillip, a wonderful, wonderful fantasy author who died actually quite recently, as well as Terry Pratchett, because of his sense of playfulness and the sort of buoyancy of spirit and just an endless effervescent humor that I see in his books. Also, I'm a big, big manga reader, and recently I have been absolutely head over heels in love with works by Jun Mayuzuki, Ryoko Kui, and Kamome Shirahama, who I think all three of them are so fabulously creative and writing such interesting, textured, intricate stories. Can't recommend them enough.
When you're studying abroad in London, what sites, locations, or activities do you recommend for emerging writers and scholars?
Yes. Okay, that's a good question because I guess my first piece of advice would be if you have specific interests, like for me, ballet, or for me, romantic poetry, et cetera, then follow up on those interests because there's a really good chance that, especially in London, there's going to be like a museum dedicated to it or something that is at least tangentially related and fascinating. But specifically, because I love ballet, I cannot recommend highly enough performance venues like the Royal Albert Hall, the Royal Opera House, the Sadler Wells Ballet. Oh my goodness, I saw last year, I actually happened to be in London for a research trip, of all things, and I attended a performance of Cinderella at the Royal Albert Hall that was using, I think, the Prokofiev score. Gorgeous, but a new staging because the ballet stage at the Royal Albert Hall is called like the Round. So it's a perfectly, or not perfectly, I don't know, but it's a circular or ovular, if that's a word, elliptical stage where you can sit, in a full 360-degree field around the stage. So the staging has to work from any angle. And I was just so incredibly delighted by the creativity of the performance. So if you can see a ballet in the round, I can't recommend it enough. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. In terms of general things to do, I love a house tour. I love, kind of smacking my lips at other people's wealth that they probably came by in hideous and unfortunate ways. But just the other day, we went to see Strawberry Hill House, right, which is like the brightest, first, most beautiful example of the Gothic revival style of architecture in England. And oh my goodness, what a treat. What a treat it was. Absolute blast. Just what a way of experiencing architecture if you've never seen a Gothic revival space before. A real sort of sensory or sensuous experience of architecture. I was just fascinated by, like the windows, fields of colored light kind of bathing everything in these unusual hues, these very rich textures and paintings. I mean, as far as the eye can see, I loved it. I want everyone to go to Strawberry Hill House. And like I said before, just go see live performances. It doesn't matter what, just go see people standing on a stage and doing something incredible.
Thank you for those suggestions, and thank you for making time for me. I've learned so much.
I feel like I've really bared my soul today. So thank you so much for having me on and asking such interesting questions.